Okay, this video will explain how Christadelphians who reject the immortality of the soul are in fact actually teaching it.
Sin and the brain, the carnal mind and consciousness as a physical property. The Christadelphian rejection of the idea that sinful impulses emanate from the brain has profound implications. By denying that the brain is the source of human thoughts, including sinful inclinations, they inadvertently reject the idea that consciousness is a physical property of the brain. This leads them to an unavoidable contradiction. If consciousness does not originate from the brain, it must exist independently of it, which implicitly affirms the immortality of the soul, a belief they explicitly reject. The brain as the source of thought and sinful impulses. Science has established that thinking is a function of the brain. Neurological studies show that all cognitive processes, including reasoning, emotions, and impulses, originate from neural activity. The brain's prefrontal cortex is responsible for decision-making and self-control, while the limbic system, particularly the amygdala, influences emotions and impulses. When people struggle with temptation or moral choices, these brain regions are actively engaged. The Bible supports the idea that sinful impulses emanate from the brain. Romans 8:7 states, "The carnal mind is enmity against God, for it is not subject to the law of God, neither indeed can be." The phrase carnal mind directly links sinfulness to the mind. Since the mind is the function of the brain, sinful impulses must arise from the brain itself. Further, James 1 verse 14-15 explains the process of temptation. But every man is tempted when he is drawn away of his own lust and enticed. Then when lust hath conceived, it bringeth forth sin. Lust, desire, and temptation are brain-generated processes. There is no need to propose an external, immaterial source, when neuroscience clearly identifies the brain's role in these experiences. Rejecting the brain as the source of sin leads to dualism. If Christadelphians claim that sinful impulses do not originate from the brain, they must answer where these impulses come from. If they exist apart from the physical body, they must belong to something immaterial. However, if thoughts and desires exist apart from the brain, then consciousness itself must also exist apart from the brain. This is dualism, the belief that the mind is separate from the body. The problem is that dualism inevitably leads to the belief in the immortality of the soul. If thoughts, desires, and even sinful impulses originate from something beyond the brain, then this something must continue to exist after death. This contradicts the Christadelphian belief that death is the end of all consciousness. By rejecting the brain as the source of thought, they unintentionally affirm the very doctrine they oppose. Scientific evidence for consciousness as a brain function. Modern neuroscience has conclusively shown that consciousness is a product of brain activity. Brain injuries, diseases, and neurological disorders all affect thought, emotion, and impulse control. Brain damage and personality changes. Injuries to the frontal lobe can cause radical changes in personality and behavior. The case of Phineas Gage, a 19th century railroad worker, is a famous example. After a severe brain injury, his personality completely changed, showing that thoughts and impulses arise from brain function. Neuroimaging and decision-making. Studies using functional MRI, fMRI, have demonstrated that when people make moral decisions, specific brain regions become active. If moral reasoning were not tied to the brain, these correlations would not exist. Drugs and brain chemistry. Substances like alcohol, antidepressants, and psychedelics can alter perception, emotion, and impulse control, further proving that consciousness is linked to the brain's biochemical processes. If consciousness were separate from the brain, none of these effects should occur. Instead, every aspect of thought, including moral reasoning and sinful desires, is demonstrably connected to neural activity. The Bible affirms the physical nature of thought. Proverbs 23 verse 7 says, "For as he thinketh in his heart, so is he." In ancient Hebrew, the heart often represented the inner mind. Today, we understand that thinking occurs in the brain, reinforcing the idea that thoughts, including sinful impulses, are physical processes. Jesus also taught that sin originates from within a person. For from within, out of the heart of men, proceed evil thoughts, adulteries, fornications, murders, thefts, covetousness, wickedness, deceit, lasciviousness, an evil eye, blasphemy, pride, foolishness. All these evil things come from within and defile the man. Mark 7:21-23. This aligns with the scientific understanding that human desires, temptations, and thoughts arise from brain activity. Conclusion. The Christadelphian denial that sinful impulses arise from the brain contradicts both scripture and neuroscience. By rejecting the brain as the source of sinful impulses, they inadvertently endorse a dualistic view of consciousness, which inevitably leads to belief in the immortality of the soul. The Bible clearly describes sin as originating in the mind, and since thinking is a function of the brain, it follows that sinful impulses must also arise from brain activity. Science confirms this understanding, showing that consciousness is entirely dependent on neural processes. Damage to the brain disrupts thought, emotion, and moral reasoning, proving that there is no immaterial mind separate from the body. To deny that sinful impulses come from the brain is to reject both biblical teaching and scientific reality. Ultimately, those who refuse to accept that the brain is the source of thinking and sinful impulses are, perhaps unknowingly, endorsing the very doctrine they seek to avoid, the immortality of the soul.
Oh, they definitely have a dualistic view of consciousness. They try to interpret it all in abstract terms.